Long before humans learned to process letters on a page, they processed tracks in the mud. A paw print pressed into damp earth is an encoded message, and reading it requires complex cognitive decoding. Evolutionary biologist E.O. Wilson and historian Carlo Ginzburg argue that modern fiction did not emerge from a vacuum of magical inspiration. It evolved directly from the mechanics of the primal hunt. Ginzburg calls this framework the synergetic paradigm. The term derives from the Greek root words for dog and leading, tracing back to the deeply embedded instincts of the tracking hound. Under this paradigm, authors and readers are not engaging in abstract poetry. They are performing cognitive operations identical to a predator navigating a physical environment. Ancient human survival depended on reconstructing the shapes, speeds, and trajectories of invisible prey. To do this, hunters analyze infinitesimal physical traces, such as animal droppings, freshly broken twigs, and spittle left on grass. Today, readers reconstruct invisible characters and worlds using a parallel set of markers. Instead of broken twigs, they follow fragmented descriptions, distinct vocabulary, and subtle linguistic traces carefully planted by the author. Storytelling is a calculated evolutionary technology. It is a system engineered to hijack our primal tracking instincts, compelling us to follow a trail of evidence to decode invisible truths. To understand how writers map these trails, we have to examine mimesis. First defined by Plato in antiquity, mimesis is the artistic imitation of reality. But compelling mimesis never attempts a strict one-to-one transcription of life. Actual human conversation is full of pauses, repetition, and dead ends. Reality is simply too noisy and structurally messy to be readable. The author faces a constant mechanical dilemma. They must filter out the overwhelming noise of the real world while maintaining the forward momentum required to keep the reader engaged. The solution is a dual-layered system. Writers map precise, highly realistic, tactile details over rigid, mathematical, and predictable narrative archetypes. These rigid formulas provide a structural handrail. They safely guide the reader's mind through chaotic psychological underworlds without allowing them to lose the plot entirely. A masterful story operates as a precise mathematical equation, cleverly disguised beneath a hyper-specific biological illusion. The architecture that governs these narrative equations is deeply rooted in the psychological myth. Carl Jung analyzed myths and dreams, concluding these archetypal structures exist for a specific cognitive reason. They teach humans how to navigate the unknown. This plots the primary variables of the archetypal world. Above the horizontal axis is order. Below lies chaos, the underworld. The protagonist's trajectory follows a sine wave. The hero makes a volitional descent, dipping sharply into the chaotic unknown. Jean Piaget called this assimilation and accommodation. To learn, we confront the unknown. At the wave's trough, the hero extracts a metaphorical treasure, deep self-knowledge. The protagonist returns, integrating that knowledge back into order. This cycle exacts a strict cognitive cost. To accommodate new information, an existing worldview must dissolve. True learning requires the shedding of previous understanding. This Jungian formula reliably satisfies the brain's baseline need for structural order, but on its own, it is an abstract skeleton. It lacks the friction necessary to function as a believable, engaging fictional reality. To add that necessary friction, writers shift from macropsychology to microlinguistics. We see this mechanic clearly through Roman Jakobson's structuralist research, derived from observing the language pathology of aphasia. This split chalkboard maps how Jakobson divided human language processing into two primary modes, metaphor on the left and metonymy on the right. In the metaphoric mode, an author asserts a poetic connection between two entirely unlike things, such as comparing romantic love to a red rose. In the metonymic mode, the author uses a physical part to indicate a complex whole. The classic example is the monarchy. Rather than explaining abstract historical weight, the physical crown serves as a concrete shorthand for the entire system. Modern crime writing and thrillers actively reject the poetic metaphoric mode. They operate almost exclusively in the metonymic mode. Readers cannot track abstract metaphors through a story's physical environment, but they can and do track factual, contiguous details. By narrowing the focus to a microscopic physical trace rather than a sweeping philosophical theme, The writer forcefully anchors the reader's attention to the tactile reality of the scene. Metonymy functions as a synergetic tool. It forces the reader to stop acting as a passive observer of mythology and recruits them as an active cognitive tracker of reality. We can see the mechanical friction of metonymy in practice by observing how thriller writers deploy hyper-specific technical truths. In his Orphan X series, novelist Greg Hurwitz describes a protagonist executing a tactical foot strike. He does not write that the hero simply stomped on a villain's foot. This skeletal diagram highlights his actual description. Hurwitz isolates the exact anatomical target, the proximal interphalangeal joint of the first metatarsal. Deploying exact medical terminology executes a specific psychological function. It forces the reader to subconsciously submit to the author's subject matter authority. The text breaks down the chain reaction triggered by this precise strike, the vasovagal response. Strong distress activates the vagus nerve, widening blood vessels. Heart rate drops, cutting circulation to the head, resulting in syncope, or fainting. This intense biological detailing perfectly illustrates the literary theorist Roland Barthes' concept of the hermeneutic code. These anatomical equations demand precise cognitive decoding. They ask the reader to process a dense piece of logic, pulling them deeper into the illusion rather than pausing the momentum of the story. This technical precision serves a rigorous purpose. It is the synergetic bait required to sustain the reader's suspension of disbelief over the span of an entire novel. When we combine the micro and macro frameworks, the mechanics of a successful novel come into focus. It is a grand Jungian myth, carefully wrapped inside a highly technical mimesis. If we look closely as this diagram zooms out, we see how these microscopic technical equations actually function nested inside the massive overarching architecture of the story. The macro structure of the sine wave provides the necessary scaffolding. It satisfies the brain's deep psychological drive for order and resolution. Simultaneously, the microstructure of the metonymic traces provides synergetic friction. This continuous path of physical traces keeps the tracking brain engaged. The author sits at the precise intersection of these massive psychological and biological forces. They act like the Colossus of Rhodes, standing astride the chaotic, churning ocean of human experience, carefully maintaining the rigid geometric order of the narrative. The author's operational goal is to manage this extreme structural tension while completely receding behind the veil of the text, remaining entirely invisible to the reader. Literature functions as an evolutionary survival tool. It offers a controlled, simulated descent into chaos, and we survive the journey only by following the calculated traces left behind by the architect.